Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wharton Global High School Investment Competition Meet the Expert Series. I'm Eli Lesser, Executive Director of the Wharton Global Youth Program. The Wharton Global Youth Program uses the opportunities of the Wharton academic community to educate, inform, and inspire pre-collegiate students to explore business and finance in meaningful ways and become leaders who will transform the global economy. One of the things that makes our community so great is that it truly reaches students around the globe, and we're really excited you're connecting with us today from around the world. But do us a favor before we get started. Let's get a sense of who's in the room with us. Stick in the chat right there. Tell us where you're listening in from, where you're connecting from, city, state, country. Give us all. Tell us who you are. We'd love to know and see where you're connecting from. In the chat right now for us, please. All right. So we're really excited to bring back this exclusive opportunity to our participants in the Global High School Investment Competition. Our Meet the Expert series is a series of video conversations featuring finance and business experts who are often connected to the Wharton School in some way. While these interviews, created specifically for our investment competition, are not designed to give student teams a competitive advantage, they're a great way to learn from today's professionals about emerging markets and thought-provoking finance terms like a gender lens investing, fintech, global markets, and so much more. To kick off this year's series, we're speaking with past champions, the dynamic brother and sister duo, Collin and Madeleine Roberts. Collin is a high school senior at Maclay School in Tallahassee, Florida, and Madeleine is a sophomore at the University of Chicago. I first met Collin and Madeleine in 2019 right here on the Wharton campus when their team Yeti Investments placed second in the regional final and third place in our global finale on campus. They competed again in 2020, this time as Over the Moon Investments, and were the overall winners in their region and global co-champions. A remarkable run for this brother-sister team. Collin and Madeleine have been very busy since their competition wins, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about it and catching up with them. Collin, great to see you again. Madeleine, also great to see you. I know your participants are excited all here to hear you about your competition experience. Maybe get some inside edge, but I don't really think so. Really hear what you experienced and what you learned. So let's get started. Collin, like so many of our competitors, you were in your senior year of high school. It's scary and exciting time. Tell us how you're preparing for the next chapter in your academic career.
Hey everyone. So, right now being a senior, I'm just trying to finish up my college applications, getting as many visits as I can to see which campus I have a feel for. And, also just trying to figure out what academic interests I want to pursue. So just finding out career options and just exploring those so that I can, pursue my interests in college.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to remind all the participants that I have a few questions for Collin and Madeleine, but then we want to get your questions. There's a Q&A panel next to the chat. Use that Q&A panel to put your questions in at any time. And once I finish my questions, I'm going to turn to you to have those questions, and I'll just pull those out for our participants. Let's turn to you, Madeleine, in Chicago. You're pursuing a double major in quantum engineering and physics with a minor in creative writing. Holy cow, that's impressive. Tell us how your experience in the competition helped prepare you for college. Oh, nope, I think we lost Madeleine here for a second. We'll have to reconnect her. I'm going to come back to you, Collin. Let's talk a little bit about the competition. A lot of our viewers do want the inside scoop. You've had teams reach out for advice to you via email. Not really recommended, but people want to hear from you specifically. So what can you specifically tell this year's competing teams about developing a sound and creative investment strategy?
Right. So I would have three main points for this. You need to be client focused, you need to keep it simple, and you need to have fun. So I think the most important thing that my team did was be client focused. And I know it's easy to get bogged down in numbers and in data when you're looking at balance sheets, income statements, looking at all these charts and data and tables. And it's easy to, find yourself overwhelmed by all the numbers. But remember that you're investing for a person. You're investing for a client. She has kids. She's trying to help people. And you need to be focusing on her when you make every single investment decision. So I would challenge you when you're developing every aspect of your strategy to relate back to the client, to see why you're doing what you're doing and whether it's actually going to benefit her. And the second most important thing that we did that we found success in was keeping it simple. You only have a 10-minute presentation time at the end, and that is not a lot of time. You need to be able to condense your strategy and for it to make sense. And because, this client has kids and she wants to be helping other people, it is important for her to understand why you're doing what you're doing. So just keep it simple and keep it client focused. And finally, have fun with it. I think both of our presentations were very, very creative in some ways. Our first one, Yeti Investors, detailed a storybook about a Yeti, and our second one actually had poems in the presentation that we put in there because our client was reading and listening to our strategies with her two young kids. And so I challenge you guys to not just keep it professional, but also have fun with it. Try to come up with a strategy and explain it in a very out of the box way to make it more appealing.
Excellent answer, Colin. I completely agree. All stuff we talk about in the learning materials and the support materials that we have, and the evidence pays off. You guys were very successful in your first year and even more successful in your second year. Let's talk about client focus for a second, though. Let's spend a minute there. How do you learn more about your client? Now, one thing we do not permit people to do is reach directly out to it. You know, our client every year is a real person. These are busy individuals. She's a very successful, busy individual. Out of the generosity, she lets us use her story to be the case study. But how do you find out more about the client? What are some strategies you've done?
Right. So I would definitely, social media is definitely a good platform to use. With our clients, we looked at, past tweets. There was even a team competing with us at the regional finals that used the client's tweets to analyze his personality to invest in that way. So social media is definitely a good outlook on the client's perspective, but it's also important just to put yourself in the client's shoes. And I know that sounds hard, but you need to be empathetic and you need to see things from her angle and try to understand, with her job, with her, scholarship money, with her kids, try to understand how she is looking at the world to address the strategy in that way.
Oh, you're not competing this year, but I see that you read the case study, didn't you?
I gotta keep myself prepared.
How to keep yourself prepared. Excellent. All right, let's talk about an advisor. Your advisor was your dad. You need an adult advisor. Sometimes they're teachers, sometimes they're parents. We emphasize really the importance of the advisor throughout the competition. How did your team use your advisor throughout both competitions you were in?
Right. So I think coming into the competition, especially the first year, we had a lot of questions. We were new to the finance world. We didn't really know how the stock market worked or how to analyze stocks. So I think what you can use your advisor is how you can use them is by asking them questions. And don't ask questions expecting direct answers, but more hoping that they provide you with the materials to discover your answers. So I think an apt analogy of the way we used our advisor was using him as a librarian. We tell him what resources we want or what answers we need to have, and he goes out and finds materials for us to read so that we can understand and create our own strategy on our own. So in a sense, you are developing your own strategy, but you need a strong foundation to do that, and I think that's when the advisor plays the most important role.
Oh man, I love that. Using your advisor as the librarian or curator, right? So, hey, you have a wealth of information, knowledge, access to materials. Get me some more information. I want to know more. Really, really great advice. All right. So we were talking about this a little bit before we started when you and I were chatting a little bit about larger economic factors that are influencing the markets globally, right? So you guys competed in 2020, coronavirus. We're now seeing supply chain distress, international relations. There was an election last year. How did you bring this macro view, this macroeconomic or larger world view into decisions you made in your approach and your strategy?
So I think with all these, different macroeconomic factors, you need to identify risk and opportunity. And when you're doing this, obviously there was a lot of risk with COVID. If you look at like cruise lines, for example, all of them have been shut down, and that is going to be a major risk. But you have to understand which risks are short-term and which ones are long-term. So going back to the cruise lines example, if you're trying to invest in a cruise line and they have limited passengers right now, if you identify that as a short-term problem, then maybe you can pick up that cruise line because it is inexpensive relatively right now, and later on it will lead to a lot of growth. So I think what's going on right now is you need to identify which sectors and industries are at risk and categorize that risk as short-term or long-term. And by doing that, you are going to be able to find opportunities of what you should invest in and what is going to lead to a lot of growth opportunities.
Excellent. Great answer. Great answer. I want to remind everybody who are with us today that they can post questions in the Q&A panel. I'm going to get to those in a couple of minutes, and our team might answer them some directly via text, but we'll get to those for Colin in a second. Colin, a champion, a two-time champion in our competition for the past 2 years, global co-champion most recently. I want to talk to you a little bit about your own experience. I remember meeting you in 2019. I think you were the youngest member on your team. Is that right?
Yes, I was a freshman back in 2019, so I was definitely one of the younger ones there.
Excellent. And so tell me what freshman Colin knew about the market when you started this competition, when your dad or whoever brought you the idea of this competition along with your sister. What did you know? What did you know about the markets, and where are you now, 4 years later?
So I think obviously when you first learn about the stock market, you have a very shallow understanding in a way. And even though at that time it's a lot better than knowing nothing, it's still, looking back on it 4 years later, I understand now how shallow of a view I had. So I think one skill I've developed over the 4 years of being in the investing world is looking at numbers and then finding out patterns in the numbers and connecting them with different things. Because, you're looking at 10Ks and financial statements and incomes, it's at first when you look at them, it's hard to understand the patterns or why things are happening. But as you keep on focusing on it and keep on looking at the numbers, trying to identify patterns, you're able to recognize market trends. You're able to recognize trends within the company that can lead to opportunities, as I was talking about before. So I think I started developing that skill back when I was a freshman, and I definitely think that skill has gone much better over the course of my investing career, short-lived investing career.
Excellent. I think we have Madeleine back. Hi, Madeleine. Welcome back.
Hi. So sorry about that.
No
My
problem.
computer
These things
malfunctioned.
happen.
But
So Madeleine, we were talking to Colin. We were reflecting before we bring you back to freshman year. Colin, he was telling us about his first experience. Let's dive right back to the beginning though, and tell us about some tips you have. You're a two-time winner of this competition with your brother. Great teams that you were on, that you led and were participant in. What is the inside scoop? What's your advice?
well, I think first and foremost, and Colin may have already hit on this, I don't know what you guys have covered, but is that this competition is ultimately about a client, and your strategy should begin and end with the client's considerations, because there's no such thing as an objectively good strategy, because each client is going to have different goals and different needs. So first and foremost, you need to make sure you are taking into account your client's specific considerations, and then from there build your strategy, instead of building a strategy and then going back and linking it to the client afterwards.
Excellent. Perfect. So before we started, you were telling us actually one of the interesting things about the competition was that when you arrived at Chicago, one of the people you met said they know you from the competition. A truly global competition.
I ran into somebody who was on Filter Coffee Investments, which I believe was a team from India, actually, who was in my dorm. And he recognized me, and we kind of chatted about, we reminisced on our competition experience.
That's excellent. So that leads me to another question about these large, this is a global competition. Business is global. You can invest in lots of different markets around the world. But a lot of students have, starting out, learning about markets, learning about economics and economic factors and macroeconomics. One of the questions I posed to Colin, I think I'd love to know from you in this global sense is, when you were developing your strategy, how did you take into consideration these unforeseen events, coronavirus, now we have supply chain distress, international relations, global elections? How do you factor that into a strategy?
Well, I think that, there's no such thing as, a company in a vacuum. With each company, there's going to be kind of these external global factors that are influencing, ultimately the price of the company. And what we were kind of tasked with figuring out is whether those events are affecting company fundamentals or just price. Because you have to distinguish as to whether an event is actually affecting what makes the company good, what makes you want to buy it, or if it's just giving you basically a discount, and that whatever the effect is short term, and it will recover. So just kind of thinking about how those trends will work out in the long term versus short term, how they're affecting different industries, because each company will be affected differently, and that was certainly the case with coronavirus, which impacted some industries more than others, and already some of the impacted industries are already starting to rebound. But then there are also some that are going to be crippled for a while. So just kind of thinking about how those factors are going to uniquely influence each company, and taking that into consideration when you're doing company analytics.
Excellent. I want to talk to you about a question I asked Colin, but I want to get your thoughts on this, Madeleine, about the role of the advisor. Your dad was your advisor, but some teams have teachers as advisors, some have professionals as advisors. Colin gave a great answer in which he said one of the ways that he thinks about the role of the advisor is a librarian. Hey, we have an idea. How do we find more information about this? What do you see as the role of the advisor, and how did you use your advisor in the competition?
Well, I think that first and foremost, the advisor is a resource. The advisor is not a team member. So that was something that we kind of tried to, keep in mind with the kinds of things we were going to my dad about. And my dad was very good about, I think he's kind of a born teacher. If we would ask him a question, he would direct us to a place to get information. He would not give us information directly. So that kind of helped us build our skills in knowing how to seek for answers, which is applicable outside of finance, obviously, but it was still something that made it, it's kind of like the whole, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for, a lifetime. So just kind of knowing how to use your advisor as a resource wisely, because ultimately this competition is a learning experience. And if you have an advisor who's a professional, learn as much as possible from them. How do they go about this? What are their methods? Where do they go to get information? So that, I think, is the role of the advisor, and it's definitely a valuable resource that all the teams should take advantage of.
Great. I'm going to turn to some great questions we have from some of our attendees. I want to remind everybody, if they have questions for Colin and Madeleine, two-time champions of the competition, please put them in the Q&A panel, and I'll pull them out the most we can. So a great question here that I think comes up a lot, especially with first-time participants in the competition. Jean-Baptiste has a question. I think a lot of us are quite concerned about the actual return on our portfolio. How did that go for you, and do you value its relevancy compared to the relevancy of the reports and strategies?
Well, Colin, I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about this too, but the thing that you have to keep in mind is that this competition is analyzing strategy, not performance. And for example, our first year, we actually lost quite a bit of money, a lot of which was due to this one investment we made in this one company. And actually, in our presentation when we were at the regional finals, I believe, we highlighted the company that was kind of our greatest mistake as our case study, and kind of talked about how we learned from that, and why we expected the downturn in that particular company to revert in the long term. So that's kind of what you need to keep in mind here, is that it is strategy based, and also you're ultimately making long-term investments, and the simulator only gives you short-term results. So kind of think more about how justifying your strategy in the long term versus how well your portfolio may or may not have done in 10 weeks, because the two aren't necessarily related.
Interesting. Colin, thoughts on returns?
Yeah, I think what Madeleine said was great, and that's an awesome question, because what I loved about this competition was how it is so strategy focused. And a lot of stock market competitions are return based, but when you require people to really go in depth with their strategy, it forces a lot of critical thinking. And I think what Madeleine said was right when she said that the actual competition is pretty short term. I think you have a 10-week trading period, something around there, and that is not a lot of time. And so I think this goes back to creating a sound investment strategy based on the client. because your return in a 10-week period is not going to reflect the fundamentals of your strategy. You do need to realize that your return is only short term, and you still need to be focused more on creating a strategy that reflects the client's needs.
Excellent. So Grace has a really good question. I asked a question about the advisor in my list of questions for you guys, and you talked a lot and gave some great advice on how to use the advisor and leverage the great knowledge and experience of an advisor. But what about the role of the team captain? Who was your team captain, and what did they do for the team?
So Madeline was actually team captain our first year. I was team captain second year. And what I did in my role as team captain was we would go out and research stocks on our own, and we would come back and we would deliberate about them. And being team captain, I was the one who finally put in the trade. I was sort of the final decision, and we had 6 team members. So also as team captain, I was, the vote that, weighed more than the others. Even though if we did split 3-3 on a vote about stock, we usually held off on that one because we wanted to make sure that every stock we picked was reflecting on, our strategy. But yeah, as team captain, definitely you need to be a leader. You need to be help setting up meetings. You need to cover other people when they can't make it there. But you also need to, execute all the trades.
Madeline, what about your view as team captain?
Yeah, so I think that there are some responsibilities that are kind of common to any team captain, like leading meetings maybe, and kind of making sure that everybody's on the same page, facilitating communication between team members, which was especially relevant when we did the competition last year when Colin was captain because we were all remote. We couldn't actually have in-person meetings at a certain point. I will say that I think that some responsibilities are kind of vary by person. In our team, I kind of tended to be responsible for the report writing, for the majority of it anyways, and just kind of some more of the creative aspects of our presentations, whereas Colin was kind of more on the trading side of things. So what I looked like as a team captain was a bit different than what Colin looked like as a team captain. But as Colin said, the main things are kind of having somebody to kind of get the final say on stocks, kind of a person to split the difference, and also somebody who is going to promote communication between team members, and just kind of organize the team's thoughts in a way that would not be possible without kind of the coherency that comes with leadership, I think.
Madeline, I want to stay with you for a second because Colin answered a similar question about targeting the client, right? And one thing we don't allow in this competition is directly reaching out to the client, right? So that's a big no-no. Don't send an email. Don't try to reach out on social media to the client. It's been very kind of this individual to give her time and her story to the competition. So how else did you approach understanding your client a little bit better? And how did you know which stocks to pick for this person?
Well, all of the information that you need really is given in the case study that you guys provide for the students. Like, for example, this year's client, Nicole Jordan, I believe, yes?
Yep.
For instance, she mentioned that she wants to fund an annual $5,000 scholarship for students at UC Davis. So that right there is something that you can consider in a strategy, and that's something that you didn't need to reach out to the client for. But that's a thing to think about. Okay, well, she needs short-term liquidity. So how are you going to provide that? On the flip side, she has a family and she's kind of relatively young in her professional career. She kind of is a long way before retirement. So how are you going to provide for her long-term needs and retirement down the line? So even that is like that kind of brief analysis was something that's just from the case study. So I'd say first and foremost, read the case study thoroughly, make note of anything and everything that seems to be relevant to how you're going to put together your strategy. And for us, we considered even some non-conventional things. Like last year when we had Reshma Sahoni, we thought about the fact that she's a mom of young children. And so we actually decided to present our strategy in the form of nursery rhymes, which was a little bit off the beaten track, but that was just kind of an extra layer of consideration of the client. was like, okay, well, what if she's watching this video with her children? So there's there's a lot of room to be creative in the information that's already given. Even though it seems limited, it's really everything you need to do a good job with this.
So the video you made was for this, what we now call the semifinal round. But, I think you're absolutely right. Your creative approach went beyond just picking your stocks. The question was about how do you pick stocks for a client, but you point out, which I think is great, and when you think of your strategy and also how to pitch your client, who is this person? What are they interested in? How do we make it interesting for you so that you'll choose our firm to represent us? Colin, let's talk about diversifying your portfolio a little bit. How many stocks? I mean, we have a stock list of over 500. Yes, it's not the global list of thousands upon thousands of equities, but still 500 is a lot. You're not going to buy one of each. How do you know how many?
Mm-hmm. So I think once again, this depends on the client. For long term, if you're focused on just sustainable growth, diversification is definitely an option to look at. Our first year, we invested in, I think, roughly 38 stocks because we wanted to hit somewhere in the 30 to 40 range to adequately diversify our portfolio. Just in case of any market recessions, we wanted to have stocks that would be able to stay even or even rebound from those. So ultimately, it is up to the client's needs and what you're trying to invest in for. But if you're aiming for sustainable long-term growth, which once again you won't see in the 10-week trading period, diversification is definitely a road to go down.
Excellent. All right, we're running out of time, but I want to know from Madeleine, because we lost her early on. You're at the University of Chicago, Madeleine. You're not studying finance. You're studying some great things. Tell us a little bit about what you learned in the competition has really kind of stayed with you or influenced your studying or thoughts while a student at the University of Chicago. What are some takeaways?
So I am currently double majoring in physics and engineering. And engineering is a very collaborative discipline. You never have an engineer that's working on a project by themselves. It's always interacting with other people. And I think that my experience with this competition was the first time when I had to work in a significant team setting for a prolonged period of time beyond just, group working in classes. So I think one of the biggest takeaways was how to work in a team. Like, how do you structure a team effectively? How do you deal with delegating tasks, especially when everybody's different and everybody has different strengths? So learning how to identify strengths and delegate. And I've had experience working as a team member, as I did in the first year, but also as just a team leader, rather, as the first year, and also just a team member in the second year. So how do you lead effectively, and how do you defer to leadership, and ultimately contribute to a team to achieve some common goal? So I think that that's going to be something that is going to come up again and again as I study and in my professional career. So I'm grateful
Excellent.
to the competition for giving me experience with that.
And we know you'll be wildly successful. Congratulations, Madeleine, on the University of Chicago and all your work. Colin, you're a senior right now applying to schools. We hope you'll keep the University of Pennsylvania in mind. We always like to have great students, champions with us, so please keep that in mind. I want to wrap up, though. I'm mindful of everyone's time. Madeleine has to get to class. Colin, I'm sure there's homework. Everyone else has to get back to work on their strategies for the competition. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Colin and Madeleine, again, for taking the time to join us today. We'll be publishing a recording of today's interview on the investment competition website, so check it out in the next couple of days. For those who are interested in our next Meet the Expert session, it's next Tuesday, a week from today, October 19th from 4 to 4:30 Eastern Time, when Wharton Professor of Management and Vice Dean of the Wharton Social Impact Initiative, Catherine Klein, will be joining us. Professor Klein will be discussing sustainable investing. I've had the pleasure of working with Professor Klein a number of times. She's a remarkable thinker when it comes to ESG and other areas of social impact investing. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. On behalf of our investment team at the Wharton Global Youth Program, thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to our great guests. We're really excited about this year's competition with teams from around the world. Keep investing, keep working. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.